بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين والطاهرين ورضي أصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. أما بعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي واجعلي وزيرا من أهلي هارون أخي أشدد به أزري. ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد، أما الآن، Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome all who are present and inshallah who will be present either by tonight for the I'tikaf program or by tomorrow, inshallah. Some of the students and friends are running behind, alhamdulillah. We pray to see them soon. And welcome to all who are present online, barakallahu feekum, in regards to your patience and your interest in our I'tikaf program, which we hold every year in 10 nights of Ramadan. Let me say a few words about that, about the I'tikaf programs and what they are, and maybe something about I'tikaf, although I've always started speaking about the I'tikaf every time that we do this. So for those who have been regulars for the last few years or even 5 years or more, you may be sick and tired of my introduction to what is I'tikaf. So that part of this will be very, very brief, inshallah. Remarks on I'tikaf, what these talks are, and then inshallah a guided meditation afterwards, at which point I will introduce the topics for these last 9 to 10 nights of Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala, that I pray that we will all be able to benefit from as a reminder and inshallah an inspiration to either to embark or to continue the spiritual journey among the paths of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and entirely to the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here in the month of Ramadan. So we're honored to actually be back in these last nights of Ramadan that bring both a profound sweetness but a kind of sorrow, the beginning of a sorrow that Ramadan is ending soon, but that we are here for the final, one could say, the final lap in the marathon, in the spiritual marathon that is Ramadan. And so welcome, everyone in marhaba to everyone, inshallah ta'ala. So let me say a few words, and then I think I will turn to the guided meditation that I had mentioned that we will have a small, just 5 to 10 minutes. So I normally run much longer for the guided meditations for those online Islamic meditation courses that I teach, but I promise inshallah to keep it very short so that we can focus on the didactic or on the teaching aspect of this, inshallah. So very briefly, what is I'tikaf? As you all know, Islam understands, or in Islamic teachings, we understand in essence 3 kinds of spiritual retreat. So I'tikaf is one kind of them, is one kind of these 3 types. And one could say it is a specific kind, but very general also. The first would be uzla, which is in a very general sense retreating from the world in some way, even temporarily. From an Islamic point of view, the intention is always temporarily. For Islam and Islamic spirituality is a spirituality that is an embodied spirituality, a fully integrated spirituality of the inward into the outward of our experience. And it's important to emphasize that with all due respect to all of them, that may emphasize an institution of retreating and being entirely separated from the world. The essence and the purpose of Islam and Islamic spirituality and the prophetic Sunnah is to be separated from the world, right? To be of the world, but not, to be in the world, but not of the world, is the phrase in English. And the only way that is accomplished is by knowing who the creator of the world is, and in knowing also who you are, and with the means that the creator has sent to separate your attachments to and from the world, in order to separate yourself, in order to awaken to your inner presence with God. And once this has sufficiently been awakened, to exit the retreat and then integrate everything that you've realized in the retreat as a tawfiq from Allah, as a blessing from Allah, into your everyday existence. In other words, transforming your regular lifestyle into a mode of contemplative living. In Islamic spirituality and Sufism, we call this the stepping out from the world and into, you could say, the spiritual realm or a place of seclusion. We call this khalwa, right? To separate ourselves and to empty ourselves of all of our attachments to the world and to egoic thinking as it wishes to reinforce its own self and its own prerogatives in the world, and in simply being polluted by the world itself and its pleasures, or its objects. So this first part of Islamic spirituality is khalwa, right? What is often times called, for example, in Shadhili spirituality, or even just in general Islamic spirituality, tajreed. Tajreed is a term that is also very specific. It ultimately means liberation of the spirit or of the soul from the entanglements of the consciousness, of the inner consciousness, into the world. So this disentanglement is tajreed itself, but also separating ourselves from the world is a form of tajreed. So tajreed in the general sense is what is also meant in uzla, in separating from the world for the sake of God and to purify ourselves and to refine ourselves so that we can be better servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we return into the world. So this term tajreed is often used. And so, uzla, tajreed, halwa, these words are used. But once we've sufficiently detached ourselves from the world in khalwa, then it is time for jalwa, to return into the world with an inner attitude of being detached from the dunya and being attached to the akhirah, or in other words, spirituality. Or akhirah is really the word used especially in early Islam for spirituality, for ruhaniyat, or for tasawwuf. There's many books in the early period which speak of ilm al-akhirah, and all this really means is the knowledge of spirituality, because that which is there and then in the akhirah is actually realized here and now in the spirit. And so they're only separated by the veil of time, although their space is one, actually. And so ilm al-akhirah, or the knowledge of, or the awareness of the hereafter, is connected very deeply to spirituality, to Islamic spirituality. And so, all these things are important. When we speak of the specific practice, the specific prophetic practice of the itikaf, let's say a few words about the general or the specific personal prophetic practice of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he retreated as an uzla, to the mountain, to the cave Hira, and he meditated there for days upon days and nights upon nights until, bi'idhnillah, by the permission of Allah, he received revelation. In that time period, what did he practice? This is a very good question, actually. What did he practice? What did the Prophet ﷺ practice before the prophetic mission? When he secluded himself in the cave, in the mountains, when he wished to get away from the society of Jahiliyyah because of his impurity of nature. He had an inner calling. He had a spiritual calling. And so he separated himself and he went up into the cave Hira. And so these general practices, which their specifics are not known to the Sirah and are definitely not mandated in the specific form that he may have practiced them, are called tahannuf practices. These practices have been generally outlined as the modalities of uzla in a very general sense. And so these are, number one, seclusion or uzla, to seclude yourself. So just the very process of secluding was one of the practices. And each one of these four practices would encourage or awaken a sense of spiritual presence, a sense of inner contemplativity, and that was the purpose of this for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who sought refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was what his heart was moved towards. So in the cave Hira, he practiced, of course, isolation. He practiced in silence, in samt, S-A-M-T, samt. He practiced hunger in ju', right? And in this context, fasting. So periods of fasting, periods of experiencing hunger, which is well known to the adepts of spirituality, that when the nafs, symbolized by the stomach, is contracted, it's only then that the spirit can expand, in a human being. And so periods of hunger and fasting. And we have also, and finally, in terms of the fourth, is what could be called in muraqabah now, which is called muraqabah, or wakefulness. There's another Arabic term for that, wakefulness. And what wakefulness meant was essentially, from a contemplative point of view, in muraqabah, to be vigilant with one's wakefulness, to actually be consciously alert. And only when one is entirely overcome by sleeping to actually go to sleep for the sake of the body. And so this sense of conscious awakenness or alertness was for the remembrance of God, not just to be awake at night and late night, as we all are. Unfortunately, at times, especially in the modern context with screens and electricity, obviously, and lights and these sort of things, and having a nice time, there's a place for entertainment and for relaxation. But the purpose of this kind of yaqaza, right, in yaqaza, or wakefulness, is to be awake for God. So to have the intention or the inner orientation of each and every moment that I am awake for God, and I attempt to feel his presence. So in other words, to be in a state of muraqabah for every moment that you're awake. This is the spiritual attitude that should be cultivated, by the seeker, by the salik, and certainly by the prophets who isolated themselves from their people and then received revelation, even if their isolation was only for a moment. We have the story of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, who was with his family and was gathering some wood around a fire for the family. he was in a moment of isolation and revelation came upon him. But for years, he was isolated from his people, right? So you can call his uzla all those years that he had to be away from his people because of because he had to run away from them due to an apparent incident that he was involved in. Alayhi salam, may God bless him and send him peace. And so we have for the Prophet ﷺ, these time periods of secluding. So this would be the general prophetic seclusion. Now, all these four terms I've just named, from isolation to silence to hunger and to wakefulness, they're incorporated, integrated into the sacred law in some way and into the sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in some way. The very form he practiced them when he was up in the mountain, it was considered the tahannuf or the Hanifi activities of the time, which was more or less various modes of meditation, but in a very general sense, which were then specialized or mandated in specific ways by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and as far as the sunnah is concerned. So I just wanted to make that point. So that's one, this is also where uzla comes from. It's really the sunnah of all the prophets, of all the messengers, of all the awliya, that in some point in their lives, they seclude themselves or they come back to a practice of seclusion. So very, very important point. And in seclusion, we have these four attributes, right, if you will. The more specifics, sunnati practice that was instituted as a kind of sunnah mu'akkada by God and his messenger is the sunnah, is the prophetic practice, the prophetically encouraged practice of i'tikaf. Right? Now, i'tikaf itself is very general, or it can be specific. So i'tikaf in the fiqh, in the usul of the sacred law, in the foundations and in the teachings of the sacred law, is nothing other than making an intention that you are secluding yourself for God in a designated place, especially for women, in a designated place which does not have to be a masjid. For men, it should be a masjid or something akin to the functionality of a masjid. Right? We, for example, here have a zawiyah where we pray regularly and we gather for majalis of dhikr. And so it is where I perform the i'tikaf. But generally speaking, it is better, of course, for men to go to the masajids, right? Those houses of worship that have been publicly established. As the realm of men is the zahir and the realm of women is the batin. But ironically, for a man to become spiritual, he must turn inwards into the batin, the very realm where a woman's soul already is. Very interesting. And oftentimes, when you find very spiritually realized women, they are like men in the sense that they have authority in the outward in some way, which is not necessarily the case, because in both cases, many of the awliya are hidden. Many of the friends of God are hidden. Right? They're hidden by God, so therefore they're veiled. It's the feminine attribute, and it has to do with the divine love, which we will speak about at some point, especially as we turn to say the Aisha, Ba'unniya, inshallah, ibnillah. So then we have the specific i'tikaf, that is the i'tikaf of Ramadan, which the Prophet ﷺ practiced until his passing from this realm. And he gave such importance to the i'tikaf that he increased his worship in a manner that the companions were just amazed by, because already no one could reach the worship of the Prophet, of the Messenger of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his austerity, in his integrity, in his constant vigilance of heart, inwardly and outwardly with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But even a master, the most supreme spiritual master in Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, increased his devotional reverence in the month of Ramadan. And why, if you may ask? As a means of showing his khashya, his humility before God, and his gratitude before God. For he was planted in the station of shukr. And so, and finally, as a model, as an uswatun hasana for the believers, for those who follow him. But it's not just because he's a model, but because of his spiritual station that he did these things, because of his ma'rifah, his witnessing of the descent of the blessings of Allah in this realm, in the month of Ramadan, in the time and space, the holy time and space, the divine time and space of Ramadan, and especially in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, when he was searching for, when he was seeking God's bounty, God's blessings, through the wasila of the night of destiny, that very night where the Quran descended in whole into the lowest heavenly realms, being prepared for the descent into the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, all of this comes back to the specific i'tikaf, comes back to the general uzla of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he received revelation in the cave Hira. So you see this coming full circle. And the essential requirements, finally, of i'tikaf, apart from, of course, being a Muslim and having faith, and of course the ritual prerequisites and requirements, is simply to be present. Simply to be present in the vicinity that you have dedicated to Allah. If you fulfill this and you do nothing apart from the prayers, your i'tikaf is accepted. This really is the mercy of God. But it's also as hard as that. It's also as hard as that. It's as hard as just being present for God for 10 nights and days, to the exclusion of the world and your attachments. It's as hard as that. This really is the essence of khalwa, to really be present for God and to sit for God, to have majlis for God, majlisu fillah. This is really its, and then to awaken to God's presence in your heart, and then due to the khalwa, to bring that presence out into every facet of your life as jalwa. This is really his purpose. So this very principle of simply being present is the essence of all spirituality, just to be present, consciously present. This is also the meaning of yaqaza, of just this wakefulness, of just being present in everything that you do, of the small things and the big things. How you perform your wudu, how you make your intention inwardly, how you're contemplatively silent as you perform the ablutions, how you move your limbs with grace as you put the water upon you, how you meet others who are there, how you keep silent, not just outwardly on the tongue, but also inwardly of the mind and of the heart. Silent always in the heart for God. All these are modalities that are cultivated and awakened in i'tikaf. They're beautifully awakened in i'tikaf. And you really, really feel in depth and in breadth, existentially, what it really means to perform an ablution with presence of heart. And what it really means to contemplatively perform not only the fara'id prayers, all the obligatory prayers, but also the nawafil, and even contemplatively listening to the adhan. You have nothing else to actually do but to be present. So all of these things that are deemed usually ordinary, it's in the ordinariness that you awaken to complete presence in such contexts and in such settings. And it's the beauty of Islamic spirituality and of the i'tikaf that the magic happens, that amazement, that wonder, that hayra. Very profound point. Sorry, I just ask everyone to mute themselves as they have now. And so the I'tikaf itself is a very special moment. And it's a beautiful means of connecting with the Sunnah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in a very beautiful contemplative way. Because now you have that space and that time to really feel into all of these sunnati practices, all of these practices. And you have enough time and space to begin self-reflection upon your own life, what you feel you're lacking, what first and foremost you have from Allah, giving thanks for that. And then also it's an opportunity, a space, a time and a space to begin praying for anyone who arises in your heart. When you hear a voice that reminds you of someone, or you think of someone, it's important to pray for them. For you're in a sacred space and moment, and God placed that, God, and so did the angels, into your very beautiful, special heart. That's in I'tikaf. And so make a list, have a mental list, and be open to the possibility of praying for anyone who arises, any person who arises in your mind or your heart, those you love and those you are even challenged by, and perhaps even especially those you are challenged by. If you're met with the resistance when someone's name or face comes into your heart or mind, pray for them. Pray at the least that God guide them. Pray at the least that Allah open the hearts between the two of you. These are the wondrous makings of actually I'tikaf and the specialness of I'tikaf. If you've done your I'tikaf well, and if you've done your inner work and the inner homework, you may be able to witness spiritually when the night of power is. There have been friends here who have witnessed it over the years. They have spiritually borne witness to when it was Laylatul Qadr, at the least for them, but definitely corroborated by others by the signs that Allah sends due to the purifying of their hearts, of the inner eye of their heart, that then is able to bear witness to the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For these signs are only meant to be found within as they are hidden, just as your heart is hidden, that then awakens in these moments of contemplation and isolation. These Maidan Fikra, so that Halwa itself was, as Ibn Ata'illah states, the place where hearts to become alive in the gardens or in the Maidan or in the arenas of contemplation and meditation. Maidan Fikra, as he says in Arabic, in the Hikam itself. So that's my introduction to what I'tikaf is, and I welcome you all again to the I'tikaf. Let me say a few words actually about a few of the authors, or a couple of the authors, and I think as we turn to the book, I will say something about them. So let's do this. Let me just say very briefly that my intention is over these next, inshallah, 9 to 10 nights to cover a lot of spiritual territory in regards to the principles and the practices of Sufism, Islam spirituality. And I've chosen a couple of the brining, the very, enlightening lights of our tradition, one being a male sheikh and one being a female sheikha, a male or a man master and woman master of Sufism. Both of whom are from at least a couple hundred years ago. In the late 1700s, early 1800s, we have Ibn Ajiba, Shaykh Ibn Ajiba Al-Shadhili, a well-known Islamic scholar and spiritual master and Sufi guide of his time, who combined to almost perfection the language of the outward with the language of the inward. And so which makes him a very beautiful person to turn to, since there's a kind of equanimity, a kind of balance of the zahir, of the outward of Islam, with the batin, of the inward of Islam. He tends to maintain a beautiful balance, but without compromising the subtleties of the batin, or the subtleties of the zahir. And this really is his mastery, and I'll speak more about that. We then have Sayyidatina, Aisha Ba'unniya Al-Qadiri, who hailed from Damascus in the 1500s. And she was considered a major Islamic scholar, very learned, but was also a mystic and a wali of Allah, and attained to spiritual heights when she was very young. And not only did she write many books on Islamic topics, she wrote a treatise on Islamic spirituality for spiritual seekers who came to her door, who were guided by God to take her pledge or her bay'ah with them. And we are speaking not just of women, but also of men who sought her spiritual direction. And she specifically writes this one book called, The Principles of Sufism. In English, it's called The Principles of Sufism. Of course, originally written in Arabic, for actually a seeker who's a man, whom she realized had, an ardent, sincere desire to actually seek God. And she sensed it, and so she prayed unto God to help this man, and then she was inspired with this book. And this book for her outlines the 4 foundational principles of Sufism. And what she really means is the principles of practicing Sufism. She doesn't get into the technicalities of the definitions of Sufism, or where it came from, or some people say it's bid'ah, or this. She goes right into it. She's speaking from a practical standpoint. What are the 4 practical foundations that make your Sufism with God, your inner spirituality with God, your relationship with God completely alive and protected and safe? And so it's a very beautiful book. And in that, as I will outline, she speaks of the 4 foundational pillars, which I'll outline now as I'm speaking of it, as you all will probably be interested. The first is Tawbah, is forgiveness. The second is Ikhlas, sincerity. The third is dhikr of Allah, a remembrance of God, constant remembrance of God. And the fourth is special. It is the divine love. I call it special because very few authorities place the divine love or the descriptions of it, those who balance the outward and the inward. Very few place the divine love as a major foundation, but is of course the essence of Sufism, the divine love. So she speaks very beautifully about it. And she has poetry, of course, very much so dedicated to her own experiences of the divine love, which, if we have time, we will read some of her poetry, inshallah. And so it adds a very beautiful feminine element to an otherwise masculine kind of element to Sufism. But then you'll notice that even those men who speak of love, they speak in the same language as women. And so obviously this realization goes beyond gender, but how it's informed by by one starting point, if you will, is a beautiful matter. And in terms of Ibn Ajiba, he's very well known. Shaykha Aisha Ba'unniya is not as well known, and so this is why I wanted to speak about her as well. But Shaykh Ahmad ibn Ajiba, he's very well known, and his works are, and especially his commentaries on very famous works, are very well known. And he's an elite scholar, and he has a profound, enlightened intellect. And his explanations are, he's like a second. He's really, if you were to take Imam al-Ghazali and Ibn Arabi and kind of merge them, that's really what Ibn Ajiba is in so many ways. And he does justice to actually both of these typologies of Sufism, right? So this is why he's a very beautiful person. And we're going to turn to his works first to kind of set a foundation, and then we'll begin reading Sayyidah Aisha's works. Radiallahu anhuma, to both of them, Hadasallahu sirruhu, to all of them. May God sanctify their secrets. So here's what I'd like to do now. We've hit the 40-minute mark. I think I will be going over an hour. I had promised an hour, but these usually go a little bit longer. So I think an hour to 15, an hour plus 15 minutes, or maximum hour and a half. This is being recorded, so feel free to log off if you need to. I'd like to do a 5-minute. So for those who wish to take a break, and feel free to, I'd like to do a 5-minute guided meditation now. I'll be in muraqabah, so as to center ourselves right before we begin, inshallah. So if everyone can be comfortable, relax, and simply sit for God and be present. Bismillah. And as you stay present, bring some attention to the blessings of your breath, to the divine blessings that is your breath. Bismillah. With every in-breath, try to straighten your spine just a little bit. And with every out-breath, try to relax your shoulders and the chin. In-breath, straighten the spine. And out-breath, relax your shoulders and chin. And all the while staying present for the divine blessing of the breath. Bismillah. And now as you stay present with your eyes shut, bring some attention to your experience of everything in the room that is in front of you. And make sure to keep some attention on your breath while keeping some attention on the sensations or your sensing of the space in front of you. And you feel still enough for the space in front of you. Give that space your salams. Assalamu alaikum. And now turn your attention to that which is to the left of you, still with your eyes shut. Simply feel the sensations of that space as it interfaces with the left side of your body, and even extend that further to the left. Once you feel comfortable and still, give that direction your salams. Assalamu alaikum. And now bring some attention to all that which is behind you. Notice how this feels. In breath and out breath. Simply stay present for all the sensations as you experience them with that which is behind you. And when you are comfortable enough and still enough and at peace with all that which is behind you, give it all salams. Assalamu alaikum. And now bring some attention to that which is to the right of you. Notice how it feels. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. And now, with each in-breath and out-breath, notice all the directions of space. That which is in front of you, to the left of you, behind you, to the right of you. Notice how all of these sensations, especially with your eyes shut, arise in your field of aware presence, in your field of awareness. Notice that all of these directions are actually one sensation, one arising of your perception in your field of awareness. Take a deep breath in. Notice all the directions as one perception. And with your breath out, relax into your field of awareness. Bismillah. You may notice in and as your field of awareness that many kinds of perceptions, many kinds of sensations, many kinds of thoughts or feelings, they may arise, yet they come and they go. But you, as this field of awareness, as this aware presence, you always remain. Welcome to your presence. Take a deep breath in and notice the spaciousness of this presence. And with the breath out, relax a bit more and become more interested in this sense of presence. And with each in-breath, stay present. And with each out-breath, relax a little more into your presence. And now, as you feel more gathered as yourself, as your presence, that which doesn't come and go, as do the thoughts and the perceptions and the sensations and the feelings. Notice that Allah is already present. Notice that Allah encompasses your sense of presence. So with each in-breath, notice your presence. And with each out-breath, try to feel Allah's presence. Bismillah. So with each in-breath, try to feel your own presence. With each out-breath, try to feel Allah's awareness of you. And surrender unto Allah's presence that is ever present and already present. وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَ مَا كُنْتُمْ. And He and Allah is with you wherever you may be. Surah Al-Hadid. If you have awakened to your heart presence, Allah is already present. He is already with you wherever you may be. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيب. And if my servant asks you, O Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about me, then verily I am already near. Try to feel God's presence of nearness as already present. Allahu hadiri. Allah is present with me. Bismillah. From this awakened space of presence, your presence of heart with Allah, let us inwardly take the Shahada again. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah. Al-Fatiha. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. Alhamdulillah, we went for about 10 minutes. I ask that those who are still in this state of presence to give yourself permission to stay there and to also be present for the presentation, and ask Allah to continue to return you back to this inward space of your heart presence with Allah, which is the real Dar es-Salam, the abode of peace or the house of peace that Allah invites all of the believers to, and in fact all to. Wallahu yad'u Dar es-Salam. And Allah invites all to the abode of peace. That abode of peace is your inner presence of heart with Allah in the most profound sense possible. All right. Alhamdulillah. All right. So let's begin with speaking about, in the very little time that we have, I've given an overall introduction, and I want to try to dive into one of the texts. And we'll just simply begin it, and we'll continue and summarize tomorrow night from where we left off, inshallah. Bismillah. So I'd like to start with, Ibn Ajiba, Shaykh Ahmad Ibn Ajiba, Shaykh Ahmad Muhammad Ibn Ajiba radiallahu an, rahimahullah, I'd like to start with some selections from this particular text. It's an excellent translation of the Arabic into English by Shaykha Aisha Ba'unniya, who is a wonderful translator and herself within the tradition of Shadhili Sufism, and who is very well known to adepts of spirituality who are interested in Shadhili spirituality. He has done a lot of very fine translations. And I ask as a reminder that everyone who is on to make sure to themselves, inshallah. I think everyone's now mute, inshallah. Good. All right. So let's begin. So I've said a few words about Ibn Ajiba. I will really just let his words speak for him and speak for the greatness of who he is. So allow me, since I've already said a few words about Shaykha Aisha, say that's enough. Shaykha Aisha Ba'unniya, which I may repeat later, but I'll say a few words about Ibn Ajiba and then dive into the text. As I mentioned, he is a formidable, authoritative scholar of the outward sciences and of the inward sciences. Again, whoever is not muted, if you can mute yourself, that will be helpful. Try to see if I can catch this person. Right here. Mashallah. All right. And what makes him so special is, ironically, the very thing that, interestingly enough, some of the Sufis almost criticize him for. What is that thing? That thing is that even by his own admittance, that in his spiritual autobiography, there's a fahrasa that's actually, one of its versions is translated by the great traditionalist philosopher, scholar of comparative religion, not well known, Jean-Louis Michon, who's a Frenchman. In this fahrasa, he speaks about how his opening, his fath, his spiritual opening, his spiritual enlightenment came late in his life. And he was very early in the game a formidable scholar of Islam. So what this means is that he learned in his early and in his middle age formation, intellectual and religious, he gained a lot of knowledge of Islam. He was a major scholar, and he was very articulate, and he wrote very beautifully. It was later that he came across the Sufi path and met a wali of Allah, a spiritual guide, who then assisted in his companionship with him in his opening, his spiritual opening. So his spiritual opening came late, and sometimes some of the Sufis state that his opening came late. Let me see if I can. So whoever has the iPhone or like the label iPhone, if they can mute themselves, like their title is iPhone, that probably means you did not name yourself. But if you can, I would appreciate that. But in any case, what seems to be for certain, kind of Sufis, a deficiency that his opening came later in life. And so therefore, he did not have many years to benefit from that opening until he died, as would be other Sufis who had a major opening, a major fath, earlier in their life, maybe in their early middle age, or even earlier, Allahu Alam. And that they had years and their whole lifetime of journeying spiritually in God and in God's presence to benefit. This actually becomes the very strength of a figure such as Ibn Ajiba. For when one's fath, in a sense, is early, there's really no need for bookish knowledge. There's no need because you're content with God's presence. You don't need to read books like I am, right? To try to fathom the like the mysteries of the divine nature and of spiritual realization and what gnosis is, etc. Because your heart is opened and the mind is not as needed as it was. At least for yourself, at least for your own search. When you have been found, in other words, by Allah, there's no longer that kind of seeking. There's another kind of journeying that occurs. It is the transition from the sayr, from the spiritual journeying Allah, towards Allah's presence in the heart, to the journey of the sayr hillah, in Allah's presence, right? And we mean this in a deeply symbolic sense, not in the sense that one merges with the other, astaghfirullah. We don't mean that. But the spiritual journey in God's presence, right? When this is a definitive for the salik, he has a fath, where one begins to realize in the intimacy of what they knew as their very selfhood, they realized that their essence, their ain, their innate selfhood was nothing other than a locus of the divine self-disclosure for God's own fath in your heart of hearts. This is considered a fath when there's certainty in this manner, in this matter. And when one has stability and this kind of yaqeen, where God's presence is beginning and has, you could say, officially pervaded your existence, for lack of a better word. This really is a fath from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In this, the seeking mind begins to really rest. It comes into a station of rest. Although one may, for the sake of God, seek and learn knowledge. And although one may use the knowledge of revelation to communicate the ahwal, the states of intimacy that one has with their Lord. And this is precisely the strength of Ibn Ajiba, that Allah willed his opening to come at the end, or towards the end of his life, so that he could use the authoritative language of revelation and the dhahir of Islam to communicate all the subtleties of the batin, of the inward realizations of Islam. Very few had the caliber of intellect and knowledge at their disposal to communicate the inner essences of things, as Ibn Ajiba has. And so it makes him an amazing purveyor, a conveyor of spiritual doctrines, of spiritual teachings, of intimations of Allah that are rooted in a language that can't be deemed too esoteric, that it is over the heads of the believers or below their hearts, or even heretical. He maintains a beautiful balance, but without compromising, again, the dhahir of Islam, the outward of Islam, and the inward of Islam. And so you have many sages and saints in Islam who speak from this perspective of gnosis, and in their speech, due to their states, the form of their communication is as if it obliterates the validity of the dhahir or the outward. They speak in a complete state of jama'ah, of complete what we could call spiritual unity, of spiritual tawheed, if you will. And without any regard, if you will, in the moment at least, for farq, or the state of separation that most people, that veiled state that most human beings are in. The veiled state that is, whose authority is the language of Sharia, of the sacred law. And, but you have figures, and so you have many figures like this. Chief among them are those such as Ibn Arabi, who I hesitate to label him exactly like this, because he keeps a very beautiful balance in his own way. But clearly his intent is ma'rifah, to distill pure gnosis of God wherever he finds it as pointers and ayat. in his Futuhat al-Makkiyah and in other places his much more esoteric works, the Fusus al-Hikam, to the extent that his writings by many of the scholars, the outward scholars rooted in Sufism, say to be careful about, because one may misunderstand what he's saying. And so the language of this kind of balance is very special that Ibn Ajiba achieves, and that many other of the Sufi authorities have achieved. It's special because it reflects in some way the prophetic inheritance, the completeness of the prophetic inheritance. For the Prophet was obviously, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, an authority of the zahir, of the outward, and of the inward. And so, ironically, that which this major Sufi and Islamic scholar is criticized for by some of the Sufis is actually comes out to be his greatest strength. And by his ability to write clearly, intellectually, and very beautifully and logically, and in the language that he uses, he's able to reach all kinds of seekers in Islam. Those who may have no understanding of Islamic spirituality, those who are at the beginning of the path and steeped in an Islamic, outward understanding of the fiqh, and those who are intermediate and those who are advanced or who have arrived at God's presence. So he speaks to all of these at once in a very beautiful way. And this is something that not every Sufi authority can actually say. So this is the kind of caliber, and much of that is, is really the hallmark and the spirit of Shadhili spirituality, that it maintains this amazing balance of the outward and the inward, of Islamic orthodoxy, and the subtle aspect of the gnosis of God, in this very harmonious kind of balance, but emphasizing spiritual knowledge, and as a way kind of emphasizing a path of shukr, of thankfulness. We don't have time to get into what that means, but when it is alluded to, I will point it out, inshallah. So from the 4 gems of Tasawwuf, in the very minimal time that we have left, I'd like to turn to his introduction to the Ifad al-Hikam, which is his commentary on the Hikam of the Hikam of Ibn Ata'illah al-Iskandari al-Shadhili. The Hikam, or the Sufi aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah, are well known in the Muslim world. It is one of the most universal texts of Islamic spirituality taught by spiritual scholars and by Sufis to seekers even outside of the Shadhili school of spirituality. So it's gained that much fame in terms of the perfection almost of the aphorisms, and its practical spirituality, and all of its allusions to subtleties of gnosis. And so we've studied in the past here and there some of the hikam, and if time permits, we'll go through some of those hikam and the commentary that Ibn Ajiba provides, and then we'll add some remarks, inshallah. But before we get there, I'd like to read a few things in the commentary. And so in the interest of time, I will probably end up rereading some or most of which I will be rereading now. And just to give you all the taste, since you guys have been patiently awaiting, and I hope so far what you have heard has been beneficial. Okay. In his own preamble, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, he starts very beautifully, and this is very, I like that Latin phrase, sine qua non, right? It's very particular of these great kind of scholars to have profound introductions in short paragraphs. So I will read what he says, and it really sets the stage for the whole book, right? So the preamble. So he first starts with the humility of by this fervent in need of his Lord, who has no need of anything. Speaking of his Lord, which is just like, that's the whole affair. He could have stopped there, right? By the slave in need of his Lord, who has no need of anything, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his name is Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Ajiba Al-Hassani. Al-Hassani is his spirit, his physical blood lineage as a Sayyid that goes through the Hassani chain, right? There's Imam Hassan and Hussein, and Imam Hussein and Hassan, Hassan and Hussein actually, and it is Imam Hassan of the Sayyids who go back to the Prophet through Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidatuna Fatima as Zahra, and then back to the Prophet. But these are the two sons who then give rise to the progeny of the Ahlul Bayt in a specific way that is blessed by the prayers of the Prophet and whom are called the Ahlul Bayt, right? The household of the Prophet. And among these two sons, Hassan and Hussein, it is Hassan who had the most children, and from him, whose descendants are more vast in regards to the Sayyids, right? As you all know. A Husseini Sayyid is a rarer form of Sayyid, but Hassani Sayyid means that you have Hassani, lineage on both sides, mother and father, going all the way back. So it's of course a very distinguished physical and spiritual lineage, and has both the spiritual and the physical blood of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so the Sayyids are considered because of this, and because of the prayers of the Prophet ﷺ, and even the prayers that you make in every prayer, right, that go back to the Al of the Prophet. The Al of the Prophet, the family of the Prophet, are very blessed and have in Islamic history been the locus of sanctity and spirituality and religious authority in the religion. Many of the renewers and the spiritual poles, if not all of them, have been of the Sayyid line. So the Sayyids are very special in Islamic civilization, if you will. So he's Al-Hassani. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And he's Hassani because I love him too, right? Like my name is Hassan, just joking. All right. The best thing, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The best thing which hearts have intended, tongues have expressed, and pens have written, is praise of the victorious, the all-knowing, the generous, the benefactor. Praise belongs to Allah, who fills the hearts of his friends with love of him, singles out their spirits to witness his immensity, and paves the way for their secrets to bear the burden of direct knowledge of him. So, I just want to say a few words about that. In that again is the whole affair, right? And he's used specific words which he will highlight, later. He's used words such as hearts, qulub, or qalb, that is the outer center of human and spiritual consciousness. Beyond the emotional heart, there is the spiritual heart, your center, your psycho-spiritual center of your being. This is in Arabic, qalb, whose hearts of his friends, who has filled the hearts of his friends with his love, and who has singled out their spirits. Now use the word spirit. The spirit, or the ruh, is considered, if you will, a step back or more prior in terms of the descent. So if you start with God's presence, you then have God's secret with the servant. From there you have the ruh, or the spirit, and from there you have the heart. These being all the centers of the human consciousness as it meets the divine presence. Each one, the higher one on the rung, is more refined, right? And so one's secret with your Lord is the most refined, existential and conscious connection that one has with their Lord through the cosmic spirit, or the metacosmic spirit, ar-ruh. Right? When the ruh as one reality bifurcates or like the sun has multiple rays, then you have arwah. These rays of the spiritual light of the sun of spirit that touches then a specific locus of, or an entity that is defined as a human soul, this creates a heart. But this entity or this entification or this ayn thabit or this immutable essence is your essence in the knowledge of God. In other words, your essential self is somehow mysteriously connected and related to Allah's eternal knowledge of Himself. He thought of you in the form of His essence and created you in a modality, in a unique expression, which then becomes an ayn thabit, an immutable essence. That combined with the ruh manifests as a heart in this subtle realm. This heart then is given a mind and a body, a nafs. That's your existence. That the residual consciousness that is created, emphasis on the word created, is your human consciousness. The connection between the ruh and the jism of your body, your particular body that God created, its interface is the human consciousness known as nafs, which is mediated by the center of that human being, which is the heart, which is connected to God's immutable essence of His own self-knowing in the uniqueness of individual expression in this realm known as you. So these words are loaded with deep, deep meanings. And if you understand this, the purpose of spirituality really is for you to know yourself in Allah's presence and to know Allah as your most essential, truest selfhood that's not even yours, and to bear witness to that whole process. That in a nutshell, and then to embody that realization very beautifully in a prophetic way. That in a nutshell is the whole program of Islamic spirituality. All right. So I wanted just to mention those terms which we will redefine as we move forward. But I gave you a personal definition of them, which is not just personal, but is just my explication or expression of what the sages have also said, and what perhaps we sometimes taste by direct experience. Their hearts rejoice. And so this is his point about his immensity, the spirits who singles out their spirits to witness his immensity and paves the way for their secrets to bear the burden of direct knowledge of him. This, of course, is the ma'rifah, or the intimate gnosis of God. Their hearts rejoice in the meadows of the gardens of his gnosis. Their spirits walk in the meadows of his malakut, which is the realm of the dominion, which is an objective realm of God's presence. You have 5 essential realms, which would take a whole hour lecture to explain. The 5 divine presences, from the nasut to the malakut, to the jabarut, to the lahut, and to the hahut. I'm not sure how many that was. Is that 5? All right, good. All right, alhamdulillah. So the nasut being in our realm here, the realm of empirical existence, of physical existence, the malakut being the subtle realm, so the realm of imagination, the realm of dreams, the barzakh, kind of all these imaginal, not imaginary, but imaginal realms, subtle realms of the psyche. That is the malakut. So it is the psychic realm, or the realm of the psyche. Above that, you have the Jabarut, the spiritual realm, or the lordly spiritual realm, which has the conference of the authority of Ruh, the spirit, the Alam al-Amr, the divine command. And it is the prophets that bring this power or this authority into our realm. And it is by that authority that your consciousness spiritually travels back unto God. Okay. Prior to that, in presence of God and a self-manifestation or self-disclosure, I should say, is the lahut, which is the divine realm. So where these meet are where you have the archangels. This is really the luminal barzakh, or the intermediary realm between the Jabarut and the lahut. You have the archangels. The lahut is more or less the throne of God and onwards, that divine kingdom, right? In its most essential and solitary sense. Then beyond that is Hahut, is the realm of the essence, which is undifferentiated. And when we speak of the essence, there's actually no longer a comparison. There cannot be any element of relativity when we speak of the divine essence, Hahut. So the divine essence. So those are the 5 realms. So he mentions the meadows of his malakut, adjoining that to the spirits here, and their secrets swim in the seas of his jabarut, in that higher realm, right? So he akins the spirits or the multiple arwah, which are kind of subtle embodiments of the sun as the rays, if you will. I'm going to use that example. Of the ruh that comes from the jabarut itself, which is then linked to the essential secrets of every human soul. That their secrets, in other words, with their Lord. So their thoughtful reflection produces jewels of knowledge, and the gems of their wisdom and the fruits of their understanding roll fluently off their tongues. Glory be to the One who chooses them for his presence and singles them out for his love. Some are wayfarers and some in majdud, meaning some are in active spiritual wayfarers upon the path who have these qualities and will either have them or will attain unto them by God's permission, or those who are majdud, those who have been divinely attracted, and in that process have been directly brought to the divine presence without the inner and the outer work of spiritual wayfaring. Right? That's a category of seekers. He annihilates them through love of his essence, and then causes them to go on by witnessing the traces of his attributes. Here, the word he is using is annihilation as in fana. Once one has arrived in their wayfaring, if we wish to use this language, at the essence of God, one is no longer present as themselves. They are annihilated in the essence. They begin subsisting by witnessing the divine attributes. So the beauty of Ibn Ajiba is he's being very careful with his language, so as not to cause any controversy even among the Sufis. In Sufi language, just a side note, there's a debate whether or not one can bear witness to the essence spiritually, if this is even possible. Some Sufis say yes, the majority or many of them say no. So he's being very careful in his language to accommodate and to also demonstrate where he stands on this matter. And God knows best. I won't say more about that. We're just beginning to talk about Sufism. Peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the fount of knowledge and light, the mother lode of gnosis and secrets. So from the beginning, with everything he's very beautifully said, he roots this all in the greatest of all spirits and secrets in God, and the greatest of all knowers of God. That is the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is the most complete knower, who is the original knower and the most completely embodied knower of God, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, in effect, mentioning that that this whole affair and this whole kind of science and art and practice of in Sufism goes back to the prophetic sunnah, his inward being, even beyond and even with his outward actions. Right? It is his essential internal wilaya, his inner aspect of wilaya, that is the essence of Sufism and its beginning. And let me just read a few more sentences, and the intention will be the next time to begin with a subsection on the science of tasawwuf and its definitions. I want to read that section somewhat carefully because it's masterful in how Shaykh Ibn Ajiba defines what Sufism is, in terms of what is Sufism from many points of view. It's really profoundly done. It's mastery. So let me end with this. For in the remaining time that we have, I will not do justice to that other section, so I might as well start, inshallah, for tomorrow night with that section, inshallah. In the ranks of the sciences, Tasawwuf, or Sufism, Islamic spirituality, is one of the proudest, greatest, and most important. It is their most radiant sun and brightest moon. And how could that not be the case when it is the core of the Sharia, of the sacred law, of the very pathway of the tariqah, and through it shine out the lights of the haqiqah. Now, that line right there is really what he ends up, unfolding as a teaching in this introduction. So I'm going to say a few words and then we'll end it. And this will bring home the relevance of tasawwuf, or Islamic spirituality, for everyone, for every Muslim, right? And for any seeker. When Ibn Ajiba states that that tasawwuf is the greatest of the sacred sciences of Islam, and then he goes on to actually state that, and how can it not be, as it is the core or the very heart of the sacred law. He will go into defining that, but his very point is that if it is the heart of the sacred law, and Muslims have to know something about the sacred law, then in other words, they have to know something about tasawwuf in order to have a successful relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life and for the sake of the next. By it being the very heart of the sacred law, it is connected intimately to the sacred law. For the acting out of the sacred law by its injunctions in fiqh has no other purpose than tasawwuf, or sincerity in one's relationship with Allah. Right? So you see how it is the heart of the sacred law. And in that regard, just as the essential injunctions are essential and mandatory, obligatory for all Muslims, this particular science is also fard ain, is obligatory for every Muslim, at least to engage with and understand on some level. For your relationship with God, your religion with God is predicated upon your sincerity with God. And that sincerity, its science is found in Sufism, in Islamic spirituality. Many people feel that, I can be sincere in my heart. Yes, you can. But to maintain that sincerity and to preserve in it and to act it out beautifully in your relationship and in your worship of God and in your relationship and interrelations with others, you need Islamic spirituality in some way, shape, or form, right? And you need a teacher for that. Very much like if you have an interest in martial arts, you can only go on for so long, imitating the moves that you watch in movies. You have to seek a teacher who teaches you the martial arts. who has some level or a degree of mastery and has the skill of teaching that art. It's the same for every sacred science. It's the same for any science, and especially the sacred sciences of Islam. So that's how it is the core of the Sharia, of the sacred law. It is the very pathway of the tariqah, that very path that allows the journeying of the human heart, the spiritual heart, unto the divine presence. That whole path is nothing other than Sufism, of Tasawwuf, right? So we have Sharia, then we have tariqah, right? And then he mentions, and through this science do the lights of the haqiqah, of the divine reality, shine and illuminate. You can only understand the subtleties of bearing witness to the divine realities by this, by this particular science of Islamic spirituality. So he lays it out very beautifully, and I'll begin with perhaps a discussion of the sacred law, the spiritual path, and the divine reality in Sharia, tariqah, and haqiqah, inshallah, tomorrow night as we continue with this text. So I thank you all for your patience, and barakallahu fikum. And if there's any comments, feel free to share, or otherwise we will end. Let's see, malakut. So there was, so in regards to the 5 of the divine presences, you have Nasut, N-A-S-U-T or N-A-S-O-O-T, Malakut, right? Jabarut, J-A-B-A-R-U-T, Mahut, and Hahut. Right. Right. Alhamdulillah. Okay. All right. Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much for your patience. You all have very busy lives, and I have all day and all night for the next 10 nights, and I'm happy to be a part of this, and I pray that as we move forward, that this will be beneficial. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. So these videos will be uploaded into our Hudur Institute website and like YouTube channel, and we hope that they will be beneficial to all of you and to anyone else who is interested in the more contemplative aspects of Islamic spirituality. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Thank you for your patience and for your participation.